On this episode of Mode Push, we get you ready for the Circuit of the Americas, the Murica Grand Prix. Getting ready for that one to see if Red Bull can wrap up the Constructors' title along with that World Drivers' Championship that they also have already this season. Are they going to get a slap on the wrist, or will they really be handed down something big from the FIA for their cost cap breach? All of that and much more. Plus, Dan Jimenez, our engineer in the building, will break down what has made that Red Bull suspension so amazing this year to be able to beat all the other teams. It's all right now on Mode Push.
Radio check. Loud and clear.
KSL Sports and KSL Podcast present Mode Push, an American view of F1, starting now.
I'm stuck. This is what you get with this. Honestly.
I'm gutted. I'm absolutely gutted.
I enjoyed this so much. Thank you.
All right, everybody, welcome on in. It's another edition of Mode Push, an American view of F1. Thanks for joining us. KSL Sports, KSL Podcast production. Alex Curie here. Dan Jimenez, my faithful co-host on the Mode Push podcast, is always joining me here on the horn. And so always glad to have Dan here with us. He's our engineer in the building. He contracts with us to talk to us about all these things, all of the smart sides of F1. Dan tackles. I'm just here to complain about everything. That's kind of what my role is. It's just like, what's the deal with this?
It's an important role, though.
I know, especially right now. I feel like I just want this is my daily reminder to everybody that Daniel Ricciardo is the only driver to win a race for McLaren in the last decade. Just a quick reminder for everybody out there that this is the world that we live in. Give us an update, Dan, on some of the, if anything is shaken out when it comes to these seats over the last couple of days as we get ready for what I like to call the Murica GP, as we get ready for Austin at the Circuit of the Americas. Any like breaking news of stuff that needs to happen inside the world of F1 that we may have missed? Anything that has to do with the cost cap stuff? Do we know how much or how little, I guess, is really what it's going to be that Red Bull is going to be penalized?
Man, so much news this week. It's coming fast and frequent. So on the cost cap side of things, came out today that the FIA and Red Bull are reaching an agreement on their breach. Basically, they've accepted the breach, or like they've signed in a breach agreement, which Red Bull is basically putting in paper. Yeah, we breached. We admit we breached the cost cap. But there's no word yet on what the penalty is going to be. There is a press conference scheduled for tomorrow, a Red Bull press conference, where people are speculating Christian Horner is going to be addressing all of this, but unlikely that the FIA will have kind of reached their final decision on what the penalties are going to be, I think, this weekend. So it's probably going to be another week or two before we know what the penalties are. And I mean, everybody, but not least of which Toto Wolff and Binotto are waiting to hear what that's going to be. And everyone, all the other drivers and team principals continue to kind of say, look, if this is a slap on the hand, then we shouldn't even have done the cost cap in the first place, because you can't just, break it and then, walk away without losing points or a championship. So we'll see. It's going to get spicy.
Will it though? Because you and I were talking about this off the air here, and I was like, I'll tell you what this sport doesn't need right now during like a critical time of growth, maybe the most explosive growth, at least in the last few decades of this sport. Like they haven't seen growth like this. They cannot afford to have like some lame controversy that the layperson like myself who looks at it and goes, come on, man, like we come from a world of sports where if you spend an extra couple $1 million, it does not mean a thing. And it's, in an era, too, where we almost laud some of the cheating, the actual cheating that goes on. This, to me, like, does it really I know that Mercedes pitches it like, oh, this is going to give them extra, this could be an extra set of upgrades that would have actually given us the world championship. It's like, no way. And the last thing the sport needs is controversy like this, which is also tough, too, because then you put them in this position. Are they going to come back harsher next year? And then everybody's going to go, hey, Red Bull got like barely a slap on the hand. We almost congratulated them to the championship.
Yeah, it's like, watching a football game, it's always the second guy that gets the unnecessary
Yes.
roughness penalty, right? So it's like Red Bull might get a slap on the hand, but if then Mercedes comes back and really breaches it the next year, maybe, the FIA has to, bring in an even harder punishment. So if I think you're right, I think that the FIA doesn't want a big controversy on their hands, like taking away Max's championship.
No way.
And so what you'll have is the other drivers and teams complain about it during the off season, and then it'll probably die out. I think.
I was trying to figure out what these announcements were going to be for all these teams, and it turns out that the Haas F1 announcement was just that they have a new title sponsor. Yay. Right? Or what else are we expecting from them?
A letdown.
Right. We were supposed to have something a little bit bigger, although Williams rolls in today and says that they're going to have an announcement on Saturday regarding that second seat at Williams. What do we know about that, and what's going to happen, do you think, on that side of things?
Yeah, I really hope it's Logan Sargent. So he is going to be driving an FP1 tomorrow. So this is the American driver. He's 21. He's running his first real full season in F2.
Right.
So you'd think that, like, if he has hopefully has a really good showing, doesn't like wreck the car in FP1, and then the next day they're like, hey, Logan's going to be our driver. I think, Williams is private equity owned, so they have a very, they're business-minded management team that is looking at the opportunity of having an American driver in the sport. And Logan Sargent is a Williams, like, academy driver, and he's currently like in fifth or something like that in the F2 points. He needs to finish in the top 5. He's like 9 points ahead going into the last race. So unless something catastrophic happens, he'll have enough super license points. But that's what I'm hoping that happens. And then there's all the other usual suspects kind of floating around that could be options too, like Giovinazzi, Hulkenberg, Daniel Ricciardo still, I suppose, or Mick Schumacher if he doesn't go back to Haas.
What exactly, I mean, it's a wild thing, like the whole, the carousel of seats that ends up happening in F1 because – in other sports we go, is this the best player like available? Like you draft the guy who is like the best player. And in this case, Logan Sargent isn't probably even the top American prospect when it comes to being next in line for like a legitimate seat in F1. And so where does he land in terms of like talent level? Is it just that move that is a commercial move? Are we going to see the next Latifi backmarking situation at Williams, or what do we have here?
Yeah, when you assess drivers, I think, can't remember who put it this way recently, but like you're looking at a level of experience. Obviously, you want somebody experienced, but you also want somebody young who has a future ahead of them. And I think in overall talent and speed, right? So when you look at Logan, he's got youth. And he's been pretty fast in what he's done so far, but he's got that like fourth element, which is the commercial aspect that probably, is what has brought him up, the list in the conversation. And so I expect he'd come in and probably have a slow backmarker year just because he's new. And then they'd probably give him a leash for another year to see how well he could keep up with Alex.
Well, he's new and he's in a Williams. So there's that also.
Yeah, it'll all be relative.
Is that mean of me, or
Albon,
yeah, exactly. They'll always kind of put and Albon
Williams,
he's overperformed, right? I mean that for the car, I think.
Yeah. And I was gonna say, shout out to Williams for a really cool U.S. themed livery this weekend. I think their car looks sweet this weekend, and Haas kind of threw some stars and stripes on theirs last second. It felt like, but like the Williams car looks really cool.
The Haas car still looks more Russian than it does American. That's the sad truth of it. And you know what?
And it's going to have a whole new look next season.
Yeah, too little, too late for real. If you start to like, it's like when you used to have your Pinewood Derby car made up, and then you like try to add some last minute things to win some dumb award. No, it's not going to happen, buddy. You're going to lose that thing. So all this weekend though, all the things that are surrounding F1 and all the, I saw Hamilton was saying, well, we might as well just not even have a cost cap if we're going to just give people a slap on the wrist. I love how one of the big pieces of news that comes out is how amazing these new digital ads that are going to be on cars. Like you talk about something that does not interest I think it's funny because they'll roll this out and be like, look at this amazing technology. And you're just like, all you've told us is how you guys are going to make a cajillion more dollars off of the rest of us when you have some, like, I don't know. I mean, I think it's like a changing billboard, essentially, like a small digital billboard on these cars as they drive around. So kudos to McLaren for squeezing every dollar out of their sponsorships.
Yeah, cool technology, but really the only people that are happy about this are the partnership leads at each of these teams. So it's cool. I think they also tested something in preseason testing around like LEDs on the wheel covers, and they eventually scrapped the idea because it was just causing too much like variability in the wheel balance. But F1 is definitely creative with how can you fit more sponsors onto these cars.
I don't know how much these teams care about what the teammate says about these guys who are, in these seats. Speaking of going back to Mick Schumacher and how ridiculous it would be if he's not in the sport. It makes no sense because I think about guys who are coming in and how little experience they have or how little promise that some of them even have. Like, I don't know. We just have to hold our breath and see. But Kevin Magnussen actually said in an article I was reading this week about his teammate that he says, look, I've had no influence on who drives next to me, but for what it's worth, Mick has improved and over this year for sure, and it's been super hard to beat him of late, and he deserves a place on this grid. Is there really a world where Mick Schumacher loses his seat in F1 and we can like feel okay about it? Like, it just seems so wrong.
Yeah, we'll all be scratching our heads and hoping for another team to pick him up, the following year. So I think that if I were a betting man, Mick will be in the seat for next year. I don't know why Haas has waited so long. Maybe it was related to the sponsorship deal, knowing they needed to get a new sponsor and that they've had sponsors in the past dictate who is going to be in the seat. And so they said, well, we might need to keep that spot open in case somebody comes in and says, I need my son in there. But
I need my kid in there.
That's not the case with this MoneyGram company. They said in the press conference, like, look, we are going to have no bearing on who the driver is. It's totally up to Gunter. Like, in Gunter we trust. And so that might be what they were waiting for. And then now they're like, okay, we're going to sign Mick if Daniel Ricciardo isn't interested.
What is this track set up like? Before we get a deep dive into, and Dan's been doing his homework on the suspensions that have changed kind of the way that some of these teams have, or at least some of the how these teams have really, it's made or broken some of these seasons for these teams. When you talk about the porpoising, when you talk about what Red Bull is doing when it comes to a dynamic suspension, that everybody's just kind of trying to figure out exactly what they're doing. But it's really led to them being, on the doorstep, and really they're going to win this constructors title. And so Dan's done a ton of homework on this thing. And before we get into that, I want to know what the U.S. GP, what the Circuit of the Americas is set up like. Who does it favor? What kind of a track is it compared to the ones we've seen of late? You think about how different these races were over the last little while. Suzuka, very different from Singapore. And, where does the U.S. GP land on that? How much do the drivers love or hate the Circuit of the Americas?
Yeah, the Circuit of the Americas is obviously a relatively new track. So, there aren't a lot of other series that run on it, especially that these guys would have had experience in. And so it's really like a lot of people just learning it in the simulator. And then the only track time they ever get on that track is for the F1 sessions. And so it's a medium to high downforce track. So it's got a mix of slow speed corners, medium speed corners, and a couple high speed corners. And so it's going to favor whoever can get the most out of their car in terms of downforce with minimizing drag, like every track. But I would say it's like a Suzuka with more slow speed corners. So you'll see some teams will bring the similar rear wings and aero setups that they had in Suzuka. Some I've seen have brought some new ones. I think Mercedes has a really interesting wing upgrade this week that I saw a photo come across Twitter with like these like almost like weather vanes on the very front wing, leading edge. So we'll see what all that's about. But a few improvements coming, but I think it's going to, favor Red Bull like most every other track has this year because it's all about trade-offs. It's not a very like low downforce or very high downforce track that might favor some of these other teams who have gone all in on one side of the equation. So yeah, I'm predicting Red Bull to be very fast, like usual.
Not going to be touched probably for the rest of the season in terms of like, pace and things like that. So what are teams actually, what are they going to try to accomplish over these next last few races of the season as we look forward to the rest of this thing? Everybody knows it's already locked up. Your world champion's already there, and then your constructors title is all but wrapped up. And so what are these teams? They all have different goals at this point. When you have these few races left and you have a dominant team, it kind of ends up like this. And so who interests you from a level of like, okay, this thing is going to catch my attention over the next few races of what this team can do, or because goals at this point I feel like are a little bit all over the place.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Everyone is looking at the last few races as test sessions, right? Getting actual on-track time in the F1 car is very limited. And so if you're in a spot where you can safely guard your position in the constructors standings, then you're likely taking a bit more risk with trying new parts out. If you're in a tight battle like Alpine and McLaren, then maybe you're a bit more conservative and trying to run your best stuff. So, value to whoever can kind of distance themselves from the person behind them in the points. And you'll just see people taking a bit more risks on the setup side. And so I think that makes the free practices more interesting because they're going to be learning a lot. And hopefully, a success I think is looked at as finding one or two definite wins in the last few races to implement into your design for the next year.
Looking forward to the rest of these races of the season, which one do you go? That one is one that we're really looking forward to. That's the track that I love. I know that I think Brazil's the last sprint race of the season too. Does that bring enough interest to you, or is it just like, hey, Abu Dhabi's a night circuit, it's got those lights on? What interests you in these last few races?
I like Brazil. I've always liked Brazil. I feel like that there's it seems to always be an exciting race to me. Like sometimes the rain, plays a factor. It's a fast but short track, and I love short tracks because it just condenses the field a bit more. So I like Brazil. I like Abu Dhabi as a night race too, and obviously good, exciting memories from last year. And I think there's going to be, track changes to the Abu Dhabi layout and DRS changes from last year that should make the racing even better. So I look at those two and probably with the most level of anticipation.
All right, so since you've busted out all the homework, you've done all the legwork on this thing from an engineering side, so that someone like me can understand, Dan, and which means you got to maybe dumb it down even more than what you'd prepared. Help me understand.
Right?
Help me understand what Red Bull has done this year. I think it is fascinating that these teams are given a spec sheet on what you have to follow. Here are the regulations. Here's what you have to do, and one that they all come out kind of looking the same. You kind of go, okay, this looks pretty close. And then you have a variety of kind of spying on teams and back and forth. But F1 has been like this, where you have a team who the engineers crack a code that the other teams haven't figured out. And in some cases, I think when Williams had their active suspension that they came up with in the 80s, they were getting a second and a half a lap on teams in some of these races because of what they had developed as this technology. And while it might be bad racing for that moment, it levels it makes the sport more exciting once everybody can kind of figure it out. It seems like Red Bull, though not to that extent, has figured something out with this year's regulations. Why have they been so different on the suspension side of things and their aero side of things that have made them, the go-to probable constructors champions?
Yeah. So the big change this year in the cars, which we talked about on previous podcasts, was the change to what they call the ground effect car. So these cars are now really level with the ground and very close to it. And then the wings and the front rear wings are a bit different. There's no front barge board. So there's just a total different approach to the aero on the car this year. And what I found through, the research is that Red Bull, they did something starting in the Sebastian Vettel era with suspension, where they had what's called a push rod suspension up front and a pull rod in the back. And it's really hard to, describe this, just kind of over a podcast, but you can just think about what's a push rod, what's a pull rod. how the rod is what is connecting that front or rear wheel assembly to the springs and dampers inside of the car. So like in our, road going cars, you pull the wheel off and you see a shock and a spring right there. And with these open wheel cars, you just see the wheels and then a bunch of rods going into the car, and you're not seeing any springs or shocks outboard. And so it's all packaged really tightly inside of the car. And how you position the placement of all those rods can have a really big effect on the forces that the car kind of exhibits onto the tire. So Red Bull pioneered this kind of way to do front and back suspension starting in 2009 that has like become the norm in F1 through 2021. And then in 2022, Red Bull came and like flipped the script. They're like, okay, we're going to go pull rod up front, push rod out back. And some of the reasons why they did that is for like packaging. It's a very tight space to fit a lot of really intricate components. And the smaller you can make it, the more space you leave for aero. So big diffuser in the rear of the car, that's that like the part where the air comes out from underneath the car and gets sucked up. It creates a ton of downforce. Like, hey, you got to make room for a diffuser. Okay, we got to change the way our suspension is designed in the back to make it smaller. And so another thing that it affects is what's called like different forces that get acted on the tire by the kind of movement momentum of the car. One of them is called anti-dive. And so basically when you go to brake, you can think of anti-dive as like the force that resists your nose, like diving into the ground when you slam on the brakes. And when you do have more anti-dive, then like that keeps that car planted at that angle of attack that you maximize your downforce. And so Adrian Newey, who we talked about on the last episode, who's kind of at the center of this cost cap controversy, based on how Red Bull is accounting for his salary, which is really interesting. Adrian Newey is kind of the mastermind behind all of the aero and car design. And he pioneered what had become the standard. And now he's just was like, all right, I'm going to do it backwards now. And instead of having a bunch of rake in the car, we're going to keep it super flat. And so that I think is at the core of what's different this year that has given Red Bull an advantage and something that they're doing differently. And then beyond that, like, different, all sorts of different aero things that are happening around the side of the car and in the back of the car that they've just been iterating over the year. And what's I think interesting about Red Bull is that they weren't the fastest car at the start of the year. Ferrari was clearly the fastest car for the first, 4 races. And Red Bull just kept bringing small improvement after small improvement until back half of the season, they're just dominating, right? 6 or 7, I've lost count how many wins in a row Red Bull has had. So if you get nerdy on this and you want to have want to learn more, there are just, lots of sites out there, and I can tweet some of my favorite references about like little drawings of like, oh, look at this little cut that they have in like the back, corner of the car. And you're like, that's probably doing this, and just tons of speculation. And all the teams do this. They take pictures of everyone else's car each week and then go back and are like, okay, why are they doing that? And, running it through the CFD model and saying, oh, okay, that's why they're doing it. And maybe we'll try it. So I think that what Red Bull has designed for this year has given them a lasting advantage. I don't know how long it takes before the rest of the field catches up. I could see Mercedes, once they see the new Red Bull car this year, seeing like, oh man, they've totally flipped the script on the suspension design, being like, we can't do that until next year. That's too much development cost and time to change that before the end of this year. So that's going to be a 2023 thing. So it'll be interesting to see how many people copy that approach next year.
Does it actually, did it take a year like this and then everybody really will be closer next year? Or is there the possibility of, another team cracking a code, so to speak, and putting themselves at the front of the grid? Or is it going to be, are the regulations to the point now where it's like, okay, now we know exactly what you can and can't do. And by this time, teams are going to be kind of, for lack of a better term, I guess, just copying off of Red Bull, at least some version of what they're trying to do. Is it going to be at least, what I'm saying is it going to be a close championship race next year?
I expect it to be a lot closer than this year. I think just with so many things that changed, you're more likely to get one person who figures it out quicker than everybody else. But like you said, I think the other teams will catch up, especially on like suspension and aero. And then, power, maybe there's, still advantages there with, some of the different power plants. But I expect and definitely hope for a much more competitive season next year.
Dan, breaking down the suspension and the way that Red Bull has basically stolen this year's constructors title. Obviously, they cheated too because they had they were using way more expensive stuff and they were able to have those upgrades, and obviously that's how they won. Everybody,
the catered lunches that they had were so great last year that they were just primed and ready to make a great suspension design, all those chicken wings.
Speaking of overspending, I was reading today that the Las Vegas Grand Prix for next year, they're planning on building a 300,000 square foot paddock for these teams, which, to put it in perspective, I think that, and paddocks vary in different sizes, but it will be the largest by a factor of 1.5, basically, over the largest paddocks across F1. And so you think Las Vegas is going to go big, and then they really outdo themselves. And so it's going to be one. Again, I'm just basically putting all this stuff in your ear for when we expense this trip to go to Vegas next year to see this Grand Prix.
300,000 square feet. I mean, they're going to have to plow over a few old casinos and strip clubs to make room for it. That's a pretty big paddock.
Or just build around them, and so that's actually part of the paddock as well. You have those
all part of the experience.
Casinos and strip clubs in the very middle of the old circus in the very middle of the of the paddock. Well, looking forward to this weekend with the U.S. Grand Prix. Red Bull, the obvious favorite, basically at the rest of the races for the rest of the year. Give me your odds that Checo is going to be either in first or second position this weekend. Can he beat Max? And even if he doesn't, can he be second in front of Charles?
I think those are good odds. I'd give those 4-1 odds, maybe. That's he's quick right now, and I think that Checo's on a bit of a roll. So yeah, I like it. I definitely think he finishes on the podium.
Aside from American car companies who could get in on the F1 thing. We've talked about how we wish that there'd be works teams from Ford or GM in the future. And maybe there's an appetite for that. Maybe there's a place for them as well. But if it's not, we saw Audi's going to enter the fray in 2026.
Mm-hmm.
The Red Bull Porsche talks collapsed back in September, and so we're not at least going to see that for a little bit. An automotive maker that should get into F1 that is not taking advantage of the fact that this is beyond a growing sport, especially in the U.S.
Yeah, interesting you bring this up because there was an article that came out today that said that the Porsche talks are not dead, that they're still talking with the FIA. So let's, maybe hold out hope for a Porsche factory team. That would be cool.
It would immediately be my favorite team. It would be Porsche for me would be like, well, I don't know who your loyalties lie with anymore, Dan. You're all over the place. You've got you're married to two teams, and I don't understand you.
I know. I'm indecisive.
But it sounds like you're going to be a Mercedes man next year, a Mercedes AMG guy next year going forward. I feel like you have to commit because you drive the product.
I'm committing.
You're going to do it. And you know what that means?
Like, who else?
What that means for me is that then I have to start working on my wife about, well, Dan has a tie to Mercedes. He loves them so much. He drives a Mercedes. I think we should get into the Porsche game, sweetheart. Don't you think that's
right?
I'm all for it.
I think a Taycan GTS would look great on you.
I mean, look, it seems like all the Volkswagen families getting involved. If Audi and Porsche are going to do it, you might as well have a Volkswagen team as well.
That's right. Yeah. First kind of came to mind is, would there be any other Japanese manufacturers or Asian manufacturers that would want to get into it?
Think about the Korean automotive manufacturers that have popped up. You think about Hyundai and you think about Kia. These are companies that are basically building more cars than anybody else on the planet right now. And if you want to put your name at the top of lists of if you're trying, because those both have luxury brands associated with them, or at least Hyundai does with Genesis. And so
Hyundai has the Genesis,
right?
Yeah.
So maybe they look at it and they go, "Hey, look, if we can be those top names, if we can put ourselves in there, why not have a constructor out of Korea since the car manufacturers over there have blown up?"
Yeah, Hyundai, I think, would be. I'd love to see them. They seem to be like a bunch of like cowboys and mavericks over there. They've put out some really cool designs and taken some big bets on different cars, and I could see them going all in on F1 as part of their growth plan. That would be cool. I'd like that. I mean, you got Honda kind of back with Red Bull a bit. Who knows how long that lasts? But I think an Asian manufacturer would be great.
What about? I mean, we've seen. Could Fiat get in the game? I'm starting to think of like, let me see here.
Yeah. Mini.
Get Mini involved in this thing. You could have. I think that at some point, all those companies have probably had some logo on top of some car somewhere, and so they've all wanted to be a part of it. But yeah, I think it's going to get more competitive. And if there's like you said, if there's a Maverick or if there's a some CEO who's got this massive ego, and that's the case for all of these CEOs of all these big companies. If they have a little bit of a race, spark in them, then that might be something that pushes them. But I would love to see a Ford team. I would love to see a GM team. And it would probably just take a handful of years for them to be able to get in on this thing and start winning again. I think Audi predicted that in the first 2 or 3 years of them getting in was when they predicted they're going to start winning races. So as soon as 28 or 29, Dan, we could start seeing some Audi wins in the next 7 or 8 years. It's very exciting stuff.
Yeah. Toyota, they were in the sport for a while.
Yes.
And I remember growing up watching like Jarno Trulli and Ralf Schumacher running in the Toyotas. And they're a huge company. They've got Toyota Racing Development, like the TRD brand for their cars that would, I think, do well. So maybe, I don't understand what as big as Toyota is, why they're not in the sport.
Do what Alpine does. I mean, it's basically Peugeot, but it would be like having like the Supra brand of it's not really Toyota because maybe that doesn't sound as cool, but Nissan could get involved. The Infinity team, although you've seen Infinity logos on on those old World Championship Red Bulls, so. Yeah. All these guys want a piece of it. So, all right, Dan, we're looking excited. We're looking forward to the next couple of days of practices and qualifying and the Murica GP that's happening this Sunday, and at a normal time to where we don't have to time crunch. It will be competing with NFL in my house, and so we'll have to split screens. Darn it! I don't know how we're going to be able to pull it off, but somehow we'll be able to watch all the sports that we want this weekend.
Yeah. No early wake up call. God bless America. I'm excited for it.
The amount of bad foreign, like, hey, we're gonna wear cowboy hats because we're in Austin and we're in Texas.
It's so bad.
I just posted one in our
Daniel Ricciardo. Yeah, Daniel Ricciardo was on a horse.
He rode a horse. He couldn't look more uncomfortable either. He couldn't have looked more uncomfortable. I posted in our Twitter group as well. The picture of the two Ferrari guys wearing their stupid sheriff's hats and their dumb cowboy boots. They couldn't look more off-brand of anything, and it's just such. I don't know if they do it on purpose, but it looks really, really dumb. But hey,
you got to think their PR teams are putting them up to it. And then in the Ferrari thread, the Mattia Binotto went to a Spurs game last night, and the photo of him at the Spurs game sitting on the second row, like. He could not be more bored.
I know. And look, I know the Spurs aren't supposed to be good this year, but Ferrari, you don't have to act like you barely wanted to be there, Binotto. I mean, come on. He was front row with his arms crossed, like hating the experience.
And like a scarf,
yes.
Fully scarfed.
Fully Italian, scarfed indoors at an NBA
espresso
game.
In one hand.
There you go. All right, Dan, we're going to jump out again. We've got more editions. We're going to break this thing down on Sunday, because I know that we're going to try to make sure that we get this thing. You can download the podcast. You can find it wherever podcasts are found. For Dan Jimenez, Alex Curie, it's the Mode Push Podcast. We'll be back again on Sunday to get your full race breakdown of the American GP at the Circuit of the Americas. Dan, thanks for hanging out, bro.
Thank you.
All right, we'll be back again on Sunday. We'll see you then, everybody.